She gave Henry VIII a daughter, a new religion, and a crown reshaped by love. But in just 3 years, Anne Boleyn went from queen to condemned. On a cold morning in May 1536, she stood alone on a scaffold, abandoned by the man who had once defied a pope to marry her. This is the haunting truth behind her fall, how power, politics, and betrayal led to one of history's most elegant and tragic executions. And if you crave royal stories that grip you until the very end, don't forget to subscribe. Anne Boleyn was never born to be queen. She was clever, ambitious, outspoken, everything a Tudor woman was not supposed to be. Yet she captured the heart of King Henry VIII like no one before her. He waited years for her, broke from Rome, and tore England away from the Catholic Church just to make her his wife. She was crowned queen in 1533, carried high above a sea of whispers. But even in that moment of triumph, the seeds of her destruction were already being sown by jealous nobles, betrayed allies, and a king whose love turned cold when no son arrived. By early 1536, Anne's position at court had grown dangerously fragile. She had given birth to Princess Elizabeth, but 2 later pregnancies ended in loss, most devastatingly the loss of a son. Henry, once obsessed with her, began avoiding her chambers. He no longer saw a queen, he saw a disappointment. Anne still argued boldly in court, but her enemies sharpened their smiles. Jane Seymour, her quiet and calculating lady-in-waiting, had caught the king's wandering eye. In Tudor England, a queen without a son was merely a guest, waiting to be replaced. Behind the throne, silent daggers were drawn. Thomas Cromwell, once Anne's political ally, had turned against her. They clashed over religion, foreign alliances, and power. Now Cromwell sought her downfall, not with swords, but with whispers. Accusations spread: treason, adultery, even incest. Most were built on nothing, fragments of gossip twisted into something darker. But in Henry's court, truth didn't matter. Appearances did. And the king, desperate for a male heir and already drawn to Jane Seymour, did not resist the lies. He welcomed them. On May 2, 1536, Anne was watching a tennis match when a messenger approached quietly. The king had ordered her to the Tower of London. She stood stunned but did not protest. There were no cheering crowds, no trumpets, only footsteps and fear. She entered the tower through the same gate she had once passed as queen. Now she returned as a prisoner. That night, she slept in the very room where she had prepared for her coronation. This time, the only crown awaiting her was fate. She was not taken alone. 5 men were arrested with her: court musicians, poets, nobles, and her own brother, George Boleyn. All were accused of treasonous intimacy with the queen. The charges were shocking. The evidence was flimsy. Dates did not align. Some accusations were impossible. It didn't matter. Trials were rushed, testimonies coerced. No defense stood a chance. The outcome had already been chosen. This was not justice, it was removal, disguised as law. On May 2, 1536, Anne was watching a tennis match when she stood before a jury of noblemen, many of whom owed their titles to the king. Dressed in black, she held her head high as the charges were read aloud: adultery, conspiracy, betrayal. She denied every accusation calmly and with dignity, but her words fell into a courtroom already poisoned. Her brother George was tried the same day. He too denied all charges. Both were found guilty. The sentence was death. As Anne was led back to her cell, she asked quietly, "Where is my accuser?" She already knew the answer. In the tower, she waited. Ladies assigned by the king watched her constantly, not to comfort her, but to report every word she spoke. She prayed aloud. She sang softly. Sometimes she laughed. not from joy, but disbelief. She asked whether Henry would show mercy. Silence answered her. Across the courtyard, she could hear scaffolds being built. Anne requested a skilled executioner from France, one known for a swift, clean strike. Even in her final days, she faced death with grace the court could not erase. Before her own execution, the 5 men accused with her were put to death. One by one, they climbed the scaffold, silent, resigned, praying. George Boleyn spoke bravely, refusing to confess to crimes he never committed. Their deaths were meant to break Anne's legacy before the final blow. At dawn, on May 19, 1536, Anne dressed carefully in a dark gray gown with a crimson petticoat, a silent symbol of martyrdom. Guarded but unchained, she walked steadily to the scaffold. A small crowd had gathered, uneasy and uncertain whether they were witnessing justice or tragedy. The French executioner waited, his sword hidden behind a hay bale to spare her fear. There was no priest, no husband, no farewell. Standing on the scaffold, Anne addressed the crowd, not to beg, not to blame. Her voice was calm. "I am come here to die according to the law, and thus I yield myself humbly to the will of the king." She spoke no anger, offered no accusation. She prayed for Henry and praised his kindness, the performance expected of her. But her final words were for history itself. "You may silence me, but you will not erase me." The executioner stepped quietly behind her. She knelt, eyes closed, lips whispering a final prayer. With a single strike of the French sword, it was over. No scream, no struggle, only silence. The queen who had changed a kingdom now lay still on a wooden platform. Her body was left exposed for hours. No royal coffin waited. Eventually, an old arrow chest was fetched, and her remains were placed inside. She was buried without ceremony in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula, within the tower walls. For a woman who once wore a crown, her end was stripped of everything, except legacy. Before her body was even buried, Henry VIII wore white, a color of celebration. 10 days later, he married Jane Seymour. Anne's portraits were removed, her name whispered less and less. But she was not forgotten. Her daughter, Elizabeth, declared illegitimate after Anne's fall, grew up in the shadows of power. Yet the same fire that burned in her mother lived on. Sharp wit, fierce independence, unbreakable will. Decades later, Elizabeth would rise to the throne and become one of the greatest monarchs in English history, restoring her mother's honor in a way no monument ever could. Anne Boleyn was more than a queen lost to betrayal. She was the spark of a revolution, the woman who helped reshape a church, defied a world, and gave England its most iconic ruler. Her fall was brutal, swift, unjust, but her legacy endured. And though her voice was silenced on a scaffold, it still echoes through history, a reminder of what happens when a woman dares to rise.